Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are stripping away some of the gym mythology and looking at something fundamental to how we move.
And not just how we move, but how we feel movement.
Exactly. We're tackling the science of stretching. And I don't mean the how to touch your toes advice you get online. I mean that invisible wiring that connects or maybe disconnects your brain's panic button from your muscle's actual physical limits.
It's such a fascinating area because we usually treat stretching as this purely mechanical act, right?
Yeah, like you're just pulling on a rubber band.
Exactly. You pull on the rubber band, the muscle, until it gets tight.
Mm-hmm.
But the source material we have today argues that for most people, the rubber band isn't really the problem. The problem is the alarm system attached to it.
Right. And we are looking at a really specific cutting-edge study that tries to measure that alarm system. I want to make sure we get the citation right up front because this is fresh data.
For sure, credit where it's due.
We're looking at an article titled Participant and Researcher Perceptions of Stretching Intensity and Muscle Tension in Hamstrings and Shoulder Stretch in Healthy Young Adults.
That title alone tells you everything, doesn't it? Participant perception versus researcher perception. That's the conflict.
It is. It was authored by Catherine Barrett, Javier Jean Morales, Ethan Lawson, and a wider team with David G. Behm as the senior author.
A great team.
And you can find it in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine, volume 25, pages 262 to 271. It just came out online in March of 2026.
And what makes this paper so valuable for our deep dive is that it tackles a problem that has, honestly, it's plagued sports science for decades.
Mm-hmm.
In research, we rely on subjective feelings. You stretch until you feel discomfort, then you stop.
Right.
But in a clinical setting, a therapist is relying on what they feel in your tissue. They're feeling for resistance.
So the central question is, do those two things actually line up? Does my internal, ouch, that's a stretch, match the external reality of, okay, the muscle is physically tightening up?
And the big question they add on top, does being an athlete change how you answer that question?
It's perception versus mechanics. Who's the reliable narrator of your own body?
Let's get into the study design because that's where the rigor really shows.
Okay, so they didn't just grab random people. They had 18 participants, all young adults, average age around 22, a mix of 11 females, 7 males. But the demographic breakdown that really matters here is the training status.
This is so critical. Usually in a stretching study, researchers will, they'll exclude people who are already super flexible.
To control the variables.
Yeah, exactly, to get a clean baseline. But this study intentionally went the other way. They wanted the full spectrum.
Yeah, they had the whole range. Sedentary people folks doing 0 weekly activity. They had recreationally active people, and then they had 5 competitive athletes.
And by doing that, they could test if experience itself changes perception. If you stretch every single day, does your brain interpret that signal differently than someone who hasn't touched their toes in years?
Okay, let's talk about the blinding protocol because this was surprisingly rigorous. I mean, they literally blindfolded people.
They did. For the hamstring stretch, the passive supine hip flexion participants were blindfolded. This is crucial.
Because you don't want them looking at their leg and thinking, oh, that looks high enough.
Precisely. Visual cues are a massive bias. If you see your leg is vertical, your brain just goes, okay, that's a good stretch, I should stop. They wanted pure sensation.
And they had to blind the researcher, too.
Correct. The primary researcher, the one actually moving the limb, couldn't see the numbers on the goniometer, the tool measuring the angle.
So how did they record it?
A secondary researcher stood by silently and just wrote down the data. This way, the primary researcher couldn't subconsciously stop at a nice round number like 90 degrees. They had to rely entirely on the feel of the muscle.
And speaking of the researcher, this wasn't just some random person. The source says she was a former national artistic swimming team member and coach.
Which is a huge detail. That's not just a footnote. It means this researcher had expert hands. She knows what elite muscle tension feels like versus what a stiff body feels like. She wasn't guessing.
So we have the setup. Blindfolded participants, an expert researcher, 2 specific stretches.
The hamstring stretch and a standing shoulder extension. And for each one, they were looking for 2 specific cues.
The initial point and the maximum point.
Yes. The initial point is that very first moment the participant feels a stretch compared to the first moment the researcher feels any resistance at all.
And the maximum point.
That's the limit. For the participant, it's the maximum tolerable stretch. Basically, stop, I can't take any more.
And for the researcher?
It's maximum tension, the point where the muscle physically runs out of room, where it just won't lengthen any further.
Okay, let's dive into the results, starting with the hamstrings. The hip flexion stretch. First, the basics. Females had a greater range of motion than males.
Yep, about 92 degrees versus 74. That's consistent with decades of literature. No surprise there.
And athletes had significantly more range than the sedentary group. Again, not shocking. But here is where it gets really complicated. Let's talk about the gap.
The gap. This is the core conflict of the whole study. When they looked at the maximum point, that absolute limit, there was a large difference between what the researcher felt and what the participant felt.
How large?
The researcher's measurement of maximum tension was roughly 10 degrees higher than the participant's maximum tolerance.
Wait, hold on. So the participant is lying there saying, stop, that's my absolute max at, let's say, 98 degrees.
Right.
But the researcher is feeling the muscle and thinking, mechanically, I could push this leg to 108 degrees before it actually stops.
Precisely. The researcher, feeling the external tension, consistently found more available range than the person was willing to tolerate.
But this gap wasn't the same for everyone, was it? This is where that training status comes in.
No, it wasn't uniform at all. And this is the key nuance. The gap was massive for the sedentary and inexperienced groups. They tapped out early.
So their brain is screaming, stop, way before their hamstring is actually in any real danger.
That's a great way to put it. You're hitting a neural wall, not a physical one. But then you look at the athletes.
What happened with them?
For the competitive athletes, that gap almost disappeared. There was high agreement. They let the researcher push the limb almost exactly to the point where the muscle physically ran out of room.
So what does that mean? Do athletes just not feel pain? Are their nerves dead?
Not exactly.
Oh,
This gets into the difference between pain threshold and pain tolerance.
okay.
The study suggests athletes don't have a different threshold. They start feeling the stretch around the same time as everyone else. But their tolerance, their ability to endure that sensation, is much, much higher.
The source mentions something called gait control theory. Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah, so gait control theory and another concept called DNIC basically suggests that our nervous system can be trained. Think of it like a volume knob.
Okay.
When a sedentary person feels that stretch, the alarm is loud and startling, and their brain just wants to shut it off.
It's a threat.
It's a threat signal, exactly. But for the athlete, regular exposure to that feeling trains the nervous system to turn the volume down. Their brain recognizes the signal and says, oh, I know this. It's intense, but it's safe. We don't need to panic.
So it's desensitizing your internal alarm system, whereas the beginner feels that first wave of discomfort and the brain just slams on the brakes.
That's it. The limit for the beginner is neural. The limit for the athlete is mechanical.
That is a huge aha moment. It changes how you think about flexibility. But just when we think we have it all figured out, the study throws a huge curveball with the second stretch.
The standing shoulder extension.
This is where the plot thickens.
Significantly.
So this is where you're standing and someone pulls your arm backward.
Yep, extending the arm behind the body.
Okay, so based on the hamstring results, I was expecting the athletes to crush this too, but nothing.
Nothing. No significant differences, not between sexes, not between athletes and sedentary people. No. Everyone was the same.
How is that even possible? We just established that athletes have this superpower of pain tolerance. Why didn't it work here?
The authors proposed what they call the novelty hypothesis.
Novelty.
Think about your daily life. How often do you extend your arm way, way back behind you?
Maybe reaching for a seatbelt, but
Yeah.
It's not a common movement at all.
Right. The source notes that daily life requires maybe 40 to 45 degrees of extension. In this study, the average was over 52 degrees. They were pushing everyone into a range of motion that is just weird, it's unfamiliar.
So because the feeling was new, even the athletes became beginners again.
That's the implication. The experience advantage disappeared because the movement was novel to everyone. Even the athletes' brains didn't have that trained history. The alarm went off just as loud for them as for the sedentary group.
And the reliability data backs this up, doesn't it?
It does. For the hamstring stretch, there was a moderate correlation between researcher and participant. But for the shoulder stretch, the correlation for that initial point was, and I quote, negligible.
What was the number?
The Pearson correlation coefficient was 0.074.
Wow, that's basically zero.
It's functionally zero. It means for a weird new stretch, the participant's internal feeling and the researcher's external feeling were totally disconnected. They were speaking different languages.
This makes me wonder about the study's quality. If the numbers are all over the place, does that mean the science was bad?
No, actually, it's the opposite. The science was quite rigorous. We have to look at the Cronbach's alpha scores.
Cronbach's alpha. It sounds like a sci-fi villain.
It does, but it's a standard measure of internal consistency. And the scores were excellent, greater than zero point 0.9 for almost everything.
So translate that for us. What does that mean?
It means the participants were consistent with themselves. If you tested them 3 times, they stopped at the same point each time. And the researcher was consistent with herself. She found the same point of tension each time.
So the internal feeling is reliable and the external feeling is reliable.
Yes.
They just aren't the same thing.
Exactly. They're distinct phenomena. You can't just swap one for the other. You can't assume that because the researcher feels X, the participant also feels X, unless
they're an athlete doing a very familiar stretch.
Precisely. Reliability exists within the person, but agreement between people requires that shared experience.
Before we get to the takeaways, there's one other nerdy detail I want to touch on. The thixotropic effect. The study mentioned controlling for this.
Yes, this is so important for warm-ups. Thixotropy is the property of some fluids to become less viscous or more runny when they're shaken. Think of ketchup.
Right, you gotta shake the bottle.
Exactly. Muscle tissue has a thixotropic effect. When you warm up, its viscosity decreases, which makes it easier to stretch.
So they had to make sure everyone was equally warm so the results weren't skewed by that.
Right. They standardized it with a 5-minute cycling warm-up. They made sure everyone's ketchup bottle was shaken the same amount, so to speak.
Okay, let's get to this so what. What does this all mean for our listener, the learner who wants to get more flexible?
If you're a beginner, or if you just think of yourself as stiff, you need to understand that your limit, that point where you feel you have to stop, is probably neural, not mechanical.
So my brain is kind of lying to me.
It's protecting you. It's a safety mechanism. But yes, it means you are likely underestimating your physical potential. You aren't tight in terms of tissue length. You're just untrained in terms of tolerance.
And what about the professionals listening? The coaches, the therapists?
This is a huge wake-up call. You cannot assume that what you feel in a client's muscle matches what the client feels, especially with beginners or with weird new stretches.
Because you might feel nothing, but they're at their mental limit.
Exactly. And if you push past that, you risk injury or you just create a negative experience where they tense up and fight you. You have to respect the neural limit.
The study also points out this, what I'm calling the sedentary gap.
Yes. If you haven't stretched in the last year, you are operating with a big disconnect between sensation and reality. It makes you question our scientific scales. When we ask someone, how intense is this from 1 to 10, are we actually testing the muscle?
Or are we just testing their personal history with pain?
Exactly. It's such a key distinction.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really validates the idea that flexibility is as much a neurological skill as it is a physical one.
You have to teach the nervous system that a range of motion is safe. That's why familiarity is everything. In the hamstrings, experience brought the sensation of pain in line with the reality of tension.
But in the shoulders, novelty made everyone a beginner again.
It shows that tolerance is specific. Being a hamstring athlete doesn't automatically make you a shoulder athlete if the movement is foreign.
So the big takeaway, familiarity breeds tolerance. And if you're trying a new move, expect your brain to freak out before your muscles do.
And trust that your internal feeling is reliable for you, but understand that your alarm system might be set a little sensitive if you're new to it.
This has been a really fascinating look into the mechanics of stretching. It really challenges the whole idea that pain is some simple signal.
It's never simple.
Yeah.
It is always context dependent.
I really want to encourage everyone to go and look at the full article. Again, it's Participant and Researcher Perceptions of Stretching Intensity in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine.
There's so much more nuance in the data tables that we couldn't get to.
Totally. The specific joint angles for the athletes versus the sedentary group is worth a look all by itself.
For sure.
And if you want more deep dives into the science of human performance, make sure to follow the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next analysis.
Always a pleasure to unpack the data.
Until next time, keep learning and maybe go stretch those hamstrings.
Just listen to your body.